Hey y'all, welcome to Pleiadian Point of View. I'm Peyton with Peyton Energetics, and as you can probably guess, I'm a Pleiadian channel. So in this week's Point of View, the Pleiadians wanted to talk to us about the difference between focus and denial. So what they are talking about in this week's message is they are identifying what they see as a major misunderstanding in the spiritual community of one of the key teachings. So one of the first things you may have learned on the spiritual path is to think positive, right? We know that thoughts are things and that we should be always focused on the positive, the good. But what can happen, especially when we are newer on the spiritual path, is we can misunderstand what this means. And this is something that I fell into big time when I was brand new to the spiritual path, because my first spiritual teacher talked all the time about how we should never give our attention to anything except what we want. And I, of course, being a slightly overzealous lawyer, took this to heart and didn't let myself have any negative thoughts. And I would police my mind, my thoughts constantly. And whenever something negative came up, I would just bulldoze over it and think positive. And that created a bit of a disaster, because what that led me into and what the Pleiadians are talking about today is this can cause a misunderstanding in our human minds and cause us to actually suppress our negative. As we know, when we suppress something, what happens? Does it go away? No, it just explodes later and at the worst possible moment in our lives. So what the Pleiadians wanted to talk about today is this fundamental misunderstanding in the spiritual community, where many people, myself included back in the day, thought that it was really bad to ever have negative thoughts or negative emotions. And so what this does is creates a tendency in us to suppress, to deny, to shove things under the rug and refuse to look at them. And that's not what this spiritual message is all about. Now, if you have listened to the Pleiadians for a while, you know that one thing they say over and over again is to be careful what we focus on. So for the Pleiadians, there is a big difference between focus and denial. So when the Pleiadians talk to us about the importance of our focus, and that is, what are we giving our attention to? What they are saying is that we should be aware of where we are putting our attention without getting into suppression of the negative. Because a lot of us have heard spiritual messaging that makes us afraid to focus on or look at negative thoughts, negative beliefs, those negative emotions that are so uncomfortable. And so our tendency as humans is to avoid those things. And sometimes it's because we have heard spiritual teachings that tell us if we focus on the negative parts of our life, we're going to create more of that, right? Because we know that what we are putting our attention on, we are putting our energy on. And so we tend to avoid, because we can be afraid that, well, if I look at that issue that I've always had, I'm going to create more of it. So instead, we stuff it down. But when we have this messaging in the spiritual community, and when the Pleiadians tell us how important it is to be careful with what we are focusing on, they're never telling us to avoid, to deny, to suppress. And something else that we like to do when these things come up, as humans, we like to distract ourselves from them. So rather than sitting with our uncomfortable feelings, we jump on social media, we jump on our phones and start scrolling, or we fire up the next video, or we numb ourselves with substances. So these are all human behavior patterns that so many of us tend to use as a crutch to avoid looking at those parts of us that don't feel good, those parts that we're ashamed of. But as the Pleiadians wanted to clarify in this week's point of view, it is crucial for us to look at our negative side. And that means allowing ourselves to feel those negative emotions that we have, just to acknowledge them as part of ourselves. Because an interesting thing happens as soon as you start to allow yourself to feel your negative emotions. And some of these are things that we have always been taught are bad, right? We have always been taught we shouldn't be angry. It's going to make us a bad person. Or we shouldn't feel hatred or rage. Some of these very dark, primitive emotions that all of us have. And when they come up, they can be so scary that we will do anything to avoid sitting with them. But the Pleiadians wanted to tell us this week that being willing to sit with and acknowledge those negative thoughts, those negative emotions are critical for us to release that energy. So if we have had issues that have plagued us our entire life, in order to release them, we have to confront the energy. And what the Pleiadians mean when they talk about this is being willing to sit with and let ourselves feel that yucky emotion, that emotion that feels so uncomfortable. But here's an important caveat. We don't have to sit with this for a long time. So the Pleiadians are not saying that we should spend an entire day stewing in anger. When they talk about being willing to sit and actually accept and feel our negative emotions, they're only talking about doing that for about 45 seconds. If you sit with it any longer, you're going to get into judgment with it. You're going to get into the mind, into the story. And of course, the story is the who, what, where, when, and why. It is the who said what to who. And so that is where our mind likes to play. The mind will play in the negative story as long as we let it. So what the Pleiadians are clarifying for us in this fundamental message of the spiritual path, right? It is all about learning to be more positive, to release our negative emotions. But the clarification is that when we allow ourselves to sit and actually feel our negative emotions, those things we're not so proud of, we're only doing it for about a minute, just to acknowledge, to put our conscious attention on this feeling that we have. And as we do that, we start to release it once and for all. So rather than avoiding those negative feelings, and some of the ones that are super uncomfortable that we all have to deal with are things like jealousy, anger, hatred. And a lot of us on the spiritual path, we think, oh, we can never feel hatred, right? But a lot of people on the spiritual path have a lot of residual anger. So these are the emotions that we usually go out of our way to avoid, right? We will pick up that phone to avoid dealing with it. We will go for a run. We will start talking to someone, anything to avoid sitting and actually feeling these really scary emotions. So what the Pleiadians wanted to clarify with us, help us understand, is that being willing to feel these feelings is how we actually release them. Now, again, we only have to do it for a little while. If you hang out in anger or whatever is coming up for you for more than about a minute, notice how your mind will start to play with that like a cat with a toy. So we only want to do this for a short period of time to let ourselves actually feel whatever negative things are coming up for us. And with what is going on in the world, it is showing us a lot of those primitive emotions that we have denied, that we have suppressed. So this is our opportunity to feel them and let them go. And something else the Pleiadians wanted to clarify, because this can be something that takes us a moment to work into, to come to terms with the fact that we should actually let ourselves feel our negative emotions. And what they wanted us to understand is that by doing this, by being willing to sit with those uncomfortable feelings and just acknowledge them as part of ourselves, they said we will not be creating more, because so many of us in the spiritual community are really programmed that if we dwell on the negative, we're going to create more of it. But they said that's not how the process actually works. The process is that once we sit and confront those things that have always bothered us, those things that come up time and time again as issues for us. And that may be things like abandonment, unworthiness, fear. But as we sit with those and just let ourselves feel it authentically without holding back for about a minute, we actually start to release it permanently. So if you are someone who, as you hear this, start to get kind of tense and panicky, that this is going to make you create more of that nasty situation or that uncomfortable feeling, the Pleiadians tell us that's not how the creative process works. We have to feel it in order to release it. As the Pleiadians say, it's when we refuse to feel these feelings that we create more of it, because these feelings will start to present themselves in the energies we're experiencing now. So as y'all have seen, we have been getting slammed with galactic energies and solar energies over the past 2 years, which are only getting stronger. And these energies are operating to bring anything we are suppressing to the surface. So we're not going to be able to hide from it very much longer anyway. So as these issues start to come to the surface in terms of issues in your life, if you're willing to sit with it, you can start to release it. It is when we distract ourselves and stamp it down, brush it under the rug, we freeze that emotion inside of ourselves. It becomes like a rock in our energy field. And that is when we start to manifest from it. It is when the emotion isn't moving smoothly through us. So by this process of sitting with our uncomfortable feelings as they come up and bringing them into our heart, the Pleiadians love to encourage us to bring everything into our heart. We start to forgive ourselves because we have a tendency to judge ourselves for our negative emotions. We think we must be a bad person if we feel a lot of jealousy or if we have a lot of anger. We know that's not what you do, right? So we think we must be bad if we have these feelings inside of us. But a lot of these are part of what every human has. It's part of our planetary programming. And so the more we refuse to look at it, the more it becomes a problem. But once we start to be willing to just sit with it, to acknowledge that, yeah, I feel jealous in this situation, or I feel like I've been betrayed or abandoned. And these are not good feeling emotions. These are uncomfortable. But just by facing it, accepting it as a part of ourselves, that is how we release it. So this is a good practice to do as things come up organically for you. So when you find yourself in that situation and you are just really angry, you see something on TV or on your phone, and it just puts you in a spin, that's the perfect time, if you can, to sit and just let yourself feel it for about a moment. Just sit with your anger. And as you do that, you start to release any anger you're holding throughout your entire energy field, because you are accepting it, you're acknowledging it as a part of you. And as you do that, you start to forgive yourself. You start to bring the pieces of yourself that have been splintered and broken off. You start to bring them back together. So this is a super important practice for us. And so now you will know what the Pleiadians are talking about when they tell us how important it is to focus. Because once you have started to release these frozen emotions, then it is time to redirect your energy by putting your attention on what you want to create. But in doing that, we never want to deny. We never want to avoid. That's when something starts to really cause us trouble. Because as you start to process these energies that don't always feel so good, just remember, it's just energy. And energy can always be moved. It is only when we refuse to confront it that it becomes a problem. So that is what the Pleiadians wanted to share with us in this week's point of view. Let me know in the comments below, how good are you at doing this? Drop that in the comment box below. And while you're down there, don't forget, hit the subscribe button and the like button if you haven't done that yet. I'll see you next time. Bye.